Now we're going to actually look at what are the drivers now? What are the drivers, the technological innovation? What's going to drive the kingdom's renewable energy strategy? As I say, we will continue this conversation on Saudi Arabia and the market. So please, please, please do stay with us. I'd like to just briefly tell you who our moderator for this session is, a lady who's been a journalist in the energy sector, a bureau chief for the last 30 years. And last year, the beginning of last year, she moved to the International Energy Agency. She's currently the administrator of the Middle East and North Africa desk in the Global Energy Policy Division of the International Energy Agency. So please, a very, very warm welcome for Kate Dorian. Kate, I'll hand the floor to you. And gentlemen, please, please do join us, stay with us, and perhaps we'll call our panel up while you're waiting, Kate. And if we can have Hisham Al-Bakkali. Hisham, please join us, the President and CEO of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain for GE. Hisham, please join us. Mariano Berges, Fotowatia Renewable Ventures, the Chief Technology Officer, Mariano. Rad Bakarat is joining us too, also from First Solar. And Mohammed Atif. Mohammed, you're back. Thank you, from DNV. So let's get this conversation underway. And once again, I'll hand over to Kate Dorian. Kate, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ethna, for the introduction. And I'm going to wait for things to settle down a little bit before we can start. I think we are running a bit late, so maybe people don't even know we're here. Okay, let me start by introducing the panel, and then we can hopefully start the discussion when others come in. So, as Ethna said, I'm Kate Dorian. I'm an energy analyst at the International Energy Agency, dealing mainly with Middle East and North Africa. And I'm very happy to be hosting this session because I do go to Saudi Arabia a lot, and I think it is, we're starting to see things moving, so it's very exciting times. And this is not in the order, but I'll introduce you to our panelists, Mr. Hisham Al-Bakkali, who's President and CEO of GE in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, Mr. Mariano Berges, who is Chief Technology Officer of FRV, Mr. Rad Barakat, who is Vice President of Business Development for Saudi Arabia and Middle East at First Solar, and Mr. Mohammed Atif, Area Manager, Energy, Middle East and Africa at DNV. And the topic of this afternoon's discussion is on the highly anticipated strategy around clean energy technologies, including the options for developing solar and wind, and where other technologies such as nuclear would fit in. And of course, this is all part of the transformational plan, the move away from a high dependence on oil revenues for an economy that actually really does depend very, very highly on hydrocarbons. And I think Saudi Arabia is probably one of the most dependent, or the Saudi economy is one of the most dependent on oil exports for its revenues. So the move away from oil is actually probably timely, but also very ambitious. And my question is, there are a lot of targets that have been set. And you have a country in Saudi Arabia where a very youthful population. I think we have 3 million new job entrants into the market between now and 2020. The IMF only yesterday, I think, downgraded the growth forecast. You have nearly 60% of the population is under 30. I go to Saudi Arabia a lot, and everybody is talking about the Vision 2030. And most of it is positive, but there are questions asked by analysts as to whether it's too ambitious. Is the Saudi economy, which has been dominated by the public sector, is it ready for this transformation? Do we have the infrastructure in place? Do we have the legislation in place? Do we have the education? Do we have the workforce that is going to be able to match this new economy? Is it ready for a modern market economy? Don't we have to start building that first? And how fast can we do it? And is there an expectation that this ambitious project should actually produce results earlier than expected? So I think our panel here is quite diverse, and I I think they can tell us as to where the priorities are. I know that all of this is included in the vision. I know that capacity building and education and increasing the role of the private sector, they're all included. But what is going to come first? Sergio, can I start with you maybe on how you see this vision, how you see the role of technology in helping drive this vision, this program forward?
Technology in terms of manufacturing or new technologies?
I think new technologies, because we're talking about the role of renewables, because obviously there's a heavy energy focus as well. There's an energy portion in this new transformational policy.
Well, wind and solar, I think, that are going to be the ones dominating the implementation of renewables, as was mentioned in the previous panel. And in my opinion, one of the major challenges is the amount of megawatts that want to be deployed in such a short period of time. In this case, there is going to be an education period, and it will depend of how the kingdom wants to split spread that knowledge in the country, because as Roberto was mentioning in the previous panel, it's quite different strategy to have a lot of small players, when I say small sizes of 100 megawatt, deploying a lot of projects around the country, that having a tender just awarding one single contract of 1 gigawatt to only one company. That is going to concentrate the knowledge in only one company, and as you said, there are 3 million people that are going to be available to job in 3 years. And if you choose option 1, they are going to be much easier for them to educate, as more companies are going to get into the country. If you choose the option 2, it's going to be more challenges, as everything is going to be concentrated. So this, if you want to deploy roughly 2 gigawatt per year, I think that is going to be one of the major challenges.
The major challenges. I think the Saudi Oil Minister Khalid Al-Faleh said that the first bidding round would be launched pretty soon. And I wanted to ask Hisham, where do you see GE's role in this new transformation? What can you do to help with it?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, Kate, for your introduction. And let me first, since you mentioned the Vision 2030 and the role of GE in 2030 and the way we see it. So the Vision 2030 is a very ambitious plan and bold. And I think the organization of the government of Saudi Arabia are really serious about implementing the vision. And every effort from the ministers and the organizations are working very hard in order to implement. And I think the role of the private sector is to support, because the role of private sector in Vision 2030 is a pillar and a very key. So GE, since day one, and even before the announcement of Vision 2030, we have an excellent relationship, an excellent partnership with different stakeholders in the government. So we were working with them in the need of the country. So after we implemented our last investment, if I may say, a couple of years back, we were ready to announce our partners for transformation that we, Mr. Emelt, the chairman of General Electric, announced back in May 2016, which is in support of the Vision 2030 from different areas, and in fact touching all areas that you have mentioned at your introduction. So touching the people that you have said, so there is a program in training the people and bringing the technology to the country of Saudi Arabia. And again, this is part 2, if I may say, from our investment that is focusing on 2030. Second thing is to invest with our capital, joint investment, in different areas that we have announced back in May, and after that, which in forging with Aramco, we did something. With aviation also we're working with Saudi Arabian investment company. Also in power sector we are investing, and also we are investing in oil and gas sector. So all of these sectors are covering Vision 2030 from technology standpoint and from oil standpoint. We followed up with a global supplier forum. That is our strategy in developing the local content in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia by, first of all, supporting the local suppliers in the country in order to be a GE suppliers, whether inside Saudi Arabia or outside of Saudi Arabia. So by that, you support the local SMEs and the industry, and this is part of 2030. And the second thing, you bring GE suppliers worldwide to come to Saudi Arabia and to get introduced to the customers, to the stakeholders, to SAGIA, to Mudun, to SEC, Aramco, SABIC, different funds, authorities, in order to localize in Saudi Arabia. So this is also helpful. After that, we brought the digital technology foundry in the country, and we spoke about it when Jeff Immelt came to Saudi Arabia back in October, and we were blessed by His Royal Highness Prince Saud bin Naif inauguration for that event, phase 2 of GEMTech. It has been attended by 3 key ministers of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is again another step of supporting 2030 from energy standpoint, from the efficiency standpoint, because that was planned for supporting the efficiency, which is again, and the manufacturing and the people, which is part of 2030. So we talked about everything. Now we want to talk about the renewables, which is part of 2030. GE will play a key role in different areas of supporting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia vision from a renewable standpoint. And maybe I can leave the details of talking about the renewables in my second question.
Okay. I mean, sorry, you mentioned SMEs and you mentioned private sector, but the economy is still going to be driven by oil, because you still are going to need your oil export revenues in order to finance this new program. So basically, as one friend told me when the vision was first announced, she said it was like taking money from one wallet and putting it in another. So I think for a while we're still going to be reliant on oil, and there is a risk, even with the production cuts. Saudi Arabia has lost a lot of revenue because oil prices were down by more than 50%. And you're not going to be able to make it up by cutting production and selling more oil at still a lot lower number than you did before. So the question is the Saudi economy ready to be weaned from oil? And, let's not forget, it's not just that, it's also cheap feedstocks have fed the petrochemicals industry, the metals industry. I know that subsidies have been removed, but that's also had an impact on people's purchasing power. It's had an impact on the cuts in spending over the past couple of years have had an impact on the bank liquidity. It's going to have an impact on your non-oil economy growing, because you're going to need the non-oil economy to grow, and the private sector. So all of it is still related to oil, and you're no longer able to control it. In the past, Saudi Arabia alone could actually cut production, play swing producer, but there's a new kid in town. It's shale oil, and you can't really control it anymore. So you're still going to be exposed to this volatility. And my question is, we've now moved into this era where renewables have become the thing. I mean, it's the greening of Saudi Arabia in more ways than one. So I really wanted to go to Rad and ask him about the solar element of this new renewable energy move. And should it not be twinned with energy efficiency? I know there is an energy efficiency program, or at least it's an energy rationing of energy use by having... Are there standards? I mean, is it going hand in hand with this energy efficiency drive?
That's a good question, Kate. But before we get into that, I think there is one important element to emphasize, which is we cannot talk about the role of technology innovation in supporting a market without really understanding the dynamics of that market. And the role of technology innovation, I think, supporting the market developing in Saudi is not different than any other market, really. If you look at a macro scale, for example, look at IRENA's Renewable Energy 2030 map that we discussed just a couple of days ago. Current investments in renewable energies, peaked in 2015 at roughly $300 billion. It's slightly lower now, although the size of the project in solar at least has increased, mostly driven by the drop in cost in solar PV. So the total dollar sign has dropped, but the size of the project has increased. But still, by anybody's analysis, we're less than half of what we need to do to invest in renewable energy to maybe limit ourselves to 2-degree rise by 2030. Globally, we're already at 1.2 Celsius degree rise. The last 3 years have been the hottest, and every year is the peak temperature, more than the year before it. So the situation is quite serious. The role of technology innovation is really more in the maturing the technology, simplifying the technology, and dropping the cost of the technology that will support the market, not necessarily in new technology that will come or in any diverse or groundbreaking technology that will move things forward. The industry is driven by economics. If it's cheap enough, the investments will come. So this is the general picture, I think, and this applies again to Saudi. Now, moving that into solar, it's exactly what happened in solar. I mean, 2016, the total global installations of solar were 70 gigawatts. Still maybe a double-digit growth from 2015, which is a low 60 gigawatt range. I think the significant drop in price of the LCOE of solar PV has driven the wide adoption of solar. And this has been exactly the case in the region. As Mariano mentioned, this has created certain market conditions where we have central procurement programs happening. We talked about it in Saudi Arabia. We saw it in DIWA, in Adwiya, and the size of the projects are multiple 100 megawatts to a gigawatt, which puts certain implications and certain limitations on creating a sustainable market that is long-term, but it is the short kickstart of what we can do. Saudi Arabia still today is burning roughly 3 million barrels of oil equivalent. You can argue that this oil is better left in the ground or downstream industries, but it's definitely a waste to be burned in heavily subsidized sectors like power generation, desalination. Ideally, in any energy ecosystem, if you will, you honestly do not start with renewable energy. You start clearly by optimizing the process, be it teaching your kids to turn off the lights at home, to improving the thermodynamics of a chemical process at the refinery. So you optimize the process to be able to achieve the same results with the minimal input of energy. Once you've done that, this is all done through processes and engineering. Once you've done that, really you have to move into the next step, which is implementing energy efficiency technology. Globally, in the early 2000s, the average increase in the energy efficiency improvement was under 0.5%. Today, it's in the 2 to 3%, and the rate is climbing quite significantly. It's not driven by humanity really realizing the situation. It's driven, again, by economics. You have a lot of technologies, energy efficiency, heat recovery, LED lighting, and so on, that are suddenly becoming cheap. They're micro, size and scale, and they're becoming cheap, and they're more and more adopted. Energy efficiency is the next step. Energy efficiency is quite needed in Saudi Arabia. I think Dr. Shihri talked about the peak load in Saudi last summer. It was a few gigawatts less than the summer before. This was not driven by any magical, energy efficiency implementation or PV installed that dropped the peak. I mean, it was driven literally by proper planning and logistics and waving the stick that will increase the rates, the tariffs in the market, which is the proper thing to do. Then, once you've done these two steps, you move into renewables and integrating solar and wind. And obviously, solar is the main proper, technology as mainstream in Saudi Arabia. But jumping into renewables in Saudi is really like putting PV to power and air conditioning for a house in the middle of the desert with the windows open. That's what the example keeps showing. Now, having said all that, you can't really do it in this sequence. I mean, I wish we can, stop everything and replan things, but you have to do all of what I just said in parallel. And this is the complexity of what we have in Saudi Arabia. So hopefully I answered your question. So.
Thank you. I didn't really get a chance to see you all for any great length of time before the panel, so I'm not really sure. Mohammed, I wanted to ask you what you have to say about what we've been discussing, and what are the challenges that you see in the deployment, say, of solar? Because I think we're starting with solar, even though there's also big wind capacity in Saudi Arabia. But what are the challenges that you see?
Okay, I think, so first of all, assalamu alaikum, welcome everybody. It's really nice to be on this panel with distinguished colleagues as well. I'll sort of tackle your question in this way. The role of technology innovation. From my perspective, we've been discussing solar and we've been discussing what we can contribute to the system. But let's start with what innovation is. In my view, technology innovation starts with people. It's human capacity, it's human ingenuity. You can put black boxes, you can put everything you want into any system, but if the intellectual capacity is not there, if the research and development base is not there, if the channeling of those talents and skills is not there, you won't be able to harness innovation. Innovation is a human thing. So we need to focus on the human element to innovate technology. Now, the challenges of deploying solar. So obviously, the first challenge that I would state is building of human capacity. That's number one. Number two, there are challenges, but let's look at how we overcome those challenges. My view would be that, first of all, you take a country, there are not many similar countries, but a country where it has been done successfully. So I always like to take the example of South Africa. Renewable program started in 2011, very successful cost reductions, very successful deployment, 4 renewable rounds so far. They've built a local R&D base. Their universities are training renewable engineers. Manufacturing companies have invested in South Africa. So it has the elements of a successful program. It has the elements of building human capacity. So take a model like that, and I would say that number one, start to build that infrastructure. Number two, actual practical actions. Building a solar map, which has been done. Looking at the extent of the grid, which there have been some studies. Also looking at the GCC-wide dynamics. Build an optimized model. Harness the new developments in energy storage and PV, and re-optimize the system, including potential future interconnections, potential future generation options, and provide an investment map of resource, of grid capability, and of potential storage solutions as well. And finally, one of the visions that we have is with the development we're seeing in solar, with the learning curves we're seeing, and now the developments we're seeing in energy storage, we believe that in the very near future, we are going to start to get utility-scale, dispatchable solar plants which can act just as good as thermal generation plants in following load, in satisfying peak generation, in keeping the lights on in the evening. So our vision is, in the future, for a 100% carbon-free power system for the GCC and the wider Middle East. But if you take those steps that I mentioned, I believe they provide a good framework to overcome the challenges, and obviously a firm regulatory framework, very good standard contracts, documents, etc.
Yes, I think they are working on it, but you just mentioned the dispatchable solar, there's a scale, utility scale solar.
I mentioned all those words.
You mentioned, no, I wrote it down, but I'm just wondering, would that be appropriate for a terrain like Saudi Arabia? And maybe I'll get to Sergio as to what, is that one of the, are we going to see PV? Is CSP going to be appropriate for Saudi Arabia? I know that they're talking about both, and I think the minister did mention that CSP would be an element, as well as nuclear. I think we do, in the brief, there is mention of nuclear and whether that's going to come and whether it is.
For the opinion is that PV is going to be much more competitive than CSP. We think that it is right now, and regarding the dispatchability, I think that we are quite close. There are some projects, for example, they were mentioning today to me that $11 in Hawaii for a full PPA with storage plus solar. So, and we have just started with the storage. So we are at the beginning of the learning curve. I think this is one of the things that Saudi Arabia can take really advantage of in order to bring knowledge, because we are in a very incipient stage. And that can help a lot the economics of the country. okay, because can help just to be more efficient, deploying new transmission grids, more efficient what it is called the famous smart grid. So part of the smart grid comes with this, and I think that Saudi Arabia can bring a lot of value.
I wanted to ask Ryan about the solar targets. Thank you. About the solar targets. Do you think they're reasonable? Because I think the targets were much higher, and over a longer time span, they've now changed the targets. I think they're more realistic. But how realistic is it that we will be able to attain that 9.5 gigawatts by 2030?
I think the numbers that I know is 9.5 by 2023, and it's a mix of wind and solar. I think the target's to get to around 6 gigawatts of solar PV, primarily by 2023.
Yeah.
Maybe the start this year, as was discussed, 300 megawatts. I think they're going to be tendering in the range of anywhere from 700 to 1.2, 1.5 gigawatt each year to be able to achieve that. I don't know if we're going to be able to implement it and have it running by then, but at least it can be awarded, let's put it that way. But this is an important point because, I mean, it's easy to talk about Germany doing in their heydays a few gigawatts in one quarter, but that comes from a very mature system. And until you start, if you look at Dubai, for example, it starts with 13 megawatts, and then from 13, 2200 to 800. Saudi Arabia is still starting, developing the value chain to be able to achieve these figures in the time frame that is expected. And I think, hopefully, I mean, we'll see a proper tendering process, and there'll be clarity on the structure that will lead to proper execution. I think the industry is ready. A lot of engagements already with the local partners, FRB, ALJ, and others as well. And I think it's doable. It's doable. It's definitely more realistic than 54 gigawatt announced originally. But I think you have to have an ambitious target. I think that attracts everybody, and it has to have some element of reality in it as well.
And why now? I mean, why do we think that this has happened now? Was it because prices collapsed, or is it because the Saudi leadership expects that, and I think the minister said it, that he expects that demand will peak before supply does? And I mean, we certainly don't see we don't see stranded assets even to 2040, even in a 2-degree scenario. We still think that oil and fossil fuels are going to play a big part in the future energy mix, with coal maybe losing out, definitely gas growing more than oil, but there is still going to be a large component, even in the UAE, which has already started. They still see 50% role, 50% share for hydrocarbons in the economy.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion, I don't think this is driven necessarily by what's happening in the oil and gas sector per se. I mean, solar did not really pick up in Saudi when oil was $120 a barrel. It's picking up now when oil is only $50 a barrel. It's simply driven by the fact that solar is 3 to 4 cents. Who can argue with that? I think it's cheap enough, it's mature enough that it's just making its way.
Yeah, so
and actually, it's better so that's making its way now when oil is $50 a barrel. And if oil goes up to 120, I don't think that's going to slow or increase per se the deployment of solar. I think there is already detachment between oil and gas and solar. Solar is mature on its own, doesn't need the subsidies, and is competing with subsidized cost of energy generation in countries like the GCC and Saudi Arabia. And
presumably when Saudi Arabia, or a market like Saudi Arabia comes in with its bids, we may see even more competitive prices. I mean, is it possible to see prices go below what we've seen?
So 3 cents is not good enough? You want more competitive prices?
Exactly, I'm saying, how low
I think it's
can
good
it go?
enough as it is right now. Mariana,
how low can it go? I mean, and if you're manufacturing the panels, can you still make money? I think that's another one of the issues. The prices are being pushed so far. But I think that's getting into the nitty-gritty. I wanted to...
It's an important point. I mean, there is expectation for very low tariff, not just in Saudi, everywhere, obviously. And Saudi Arabia, at the same time, is not the same as Qatar or UAE. The size of the Saudi market, the socioeconomic factors that you talked about, you have to localize, you have to create jobs. And you're just kicking off a major program. How do you balance requirements in terms of localization, which is needed, and I fully support and agree with it, with achieving 3 cents? I mean, there has to be a proper, agenda of how to achieve that. It has to go in steps.
I was going to actually open it up and give the audience a chance to ask questions. Yes, please, sir.
You've been waiting for a while. Here you are, sir. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jeff Robinson from Oricon. I'm really interested the way you've been describing how quickly the change in energy mix is likely to happen. I mean, that's an incredible rollout and program. I'm also interested in what Mohammed was saying, really, saying there's a big program where to go and put PVs on things there, but actually we really should put a lot of focus on just behavioral change, efficiency, energy efficiency in the market. And I wanted to get the comments of the people on the panel about how well that's going, how well it's being pushed, and what sort of the barriers you see in the different sectors to getting behavior change and getting energy efficiency happening at scale.
Yes, please, Chef, take it.
So, first of all, maybe for the point of utilizing the renewable energy in Saudi Arabia and the concept of solar, for example, and the other, I would like to give a credit here for Saudi Electricity Company, for Engineer Ziad Al-Shirhan specific, because he started with two main projects in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which were Diba and Wa'ad al-Shamal, which they started to utilize the CSP concept, around 100 megawatt for both sites. So we can say really that Saudi Arabia already, with the support of SEC, started the concept of solar in a bigger scale, and hopefully that the new program will be tendered in the best way. There is no doubt about it, with the great relationship that we always have with and transparency that we are always having with our customers. The second thing is the wind. So the wind is not new. Also, I recall Mr. Sheikh also ordered the first unit back in 2015, and maybe this week, hopefully, we're gonna inaugurate this wind unit as well. So the renewable already started with SEC, and people started to see new things other than burning the fuel. From efficiency standpoint and from people saving standpoint, I think this is the first year we saw the surplus in SEC generation comparing to the 8% demand that we are seeing every year. And this could be related to the change of tariffs that we had at the beginning of this year. So people started to be more cautious in utilizing the power by their houses or homes. They started to know that air conditioning is a problem. Too much lights are a problem. So we started to see, at least this year, something extra. Not that we need 8% next year. And this could change the future of our demand for. This is the way I saw it. So I just want to mention this too.
Is it, I think the gentleman was trying to ask a question about public awareness. Is that happening, and has it had an impact? Or is it just the fact that electricity prices have gone up, water prices have gone up? And I know there's a public awareness campaign in Saudi Arabia. I've seen bits of it. But
Since the electricity ministry, before it gets dissolved, the awareness of electricity and by the SEC itself and by ICRA leadership. But again, if it is not the tariff, nobody will implement what they believe. And when we saw the tariff change this year, I think people started to go back and realize the advices and recommendations that have been given to them by the authority, by ICRA, by SEC, by the ministry before. And the efficiency program, we have listened to the panel of the efficiency program in the morning, and I think we noted down the plans that they are doing to reinforce the advices and recommendation for the people and to increase the awareness.
Kate, I have another question here. And again, we got about 5 minutes, so anybody else, please. Our final session of the day for Kate and the panel, please. A question, sir. Let us know who you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Khalid Sbey from Saudi Arabia, Marafaq. Thank you also for the panel for the good discussions, good insight of the renewable energy. My question to the price of the solar productions, as I hear that it's sometimes 3.5, 2.5, and 5 cents per kilowatt hours. Are we talking about when I have a contract with somebody who will build all the plants, then I will purchase the price of kilowatt hour by 3 cents? And that's the first question. Second, are we talking about 24 hours utilization of the plants? That's my question to, I think, First Solar's, Mr. Raid.
In terms of the tariff, I mean, tariff can be anywhere 3 to 5 cents. There are many, many factors influencing that tariff, what's included in it, the structure of the tariff, the site allocated, the resource, the financing, the cost of EPC, and so on. The main gist is that, you know, for a 50 megawatt project, for example, when SEC announced 50 megawatt with Taqniya, I think it was 5 cents. That was a couple of years ago. Everybody said it's quite difficult, it's almost impossible. Today, 5 cents is actually a number that any developer would wish to have for a project of that size. So the exact figure varies based on many factors. Solar plant, as it stands today with current offtake agreements, you generate a kilowatt hour, you sell it at that tariff. You don't generate, you don't have any LDs imposed on you, any capacity charges imposed on you. If you can generate and the offtaker is not able to take, then there is the concept of deemed energy kicks in. This is the current situation. This structure is evolving, and I think in the next maybe 5 years, you'll see a PV plant acting and being treated exactly the same as a conventional power plant, where you have take or pay, you have agreements, you have capacity charges imposed, and that's going to be driven by batteries and storage, and what we call PVS. And already tariffs 11 cents for existing projects. I've looked at projects with PV storage in the 50 megawatt, 200 megawatt hour range with committed capacity, actually, with tariffs as low as 8 cents with COD in 2019 and 2020. So it's happening, and I think, honestly, I think this will still compete and drive the cost even lower than what CSP can do. Even integrated CSP with combined cycle power plants, I think you can achieve less complexities and better tariffs just adding PV around a conventional combined cycle power plant.
Kate, I think our final question from the floor, I'll give it to this gentleman. Let us know who you are, sir.
My name is Majid from Saudi Arabia, Renewable Currents. My question, I'm not sure the panelists can answer. The targets of meeting the 9.5 gigawatts seems to be more focused from the public sector. I mean, the government may be looking at the public sector to achieve that target. But it seems like private sectors, and I'm talking about commercials and residentials, so putting a technology of solar on these areas could probably even accelerate that targets. And I'm not sure if anyone have talked about that or addressed that, or if you have any views on that.
Who would like to? Go ahead.
I think this is extremely a very important point, and this is the argument. When there is a central procurement program for the next few years, and you're talking about 500 megawatt project, only very few players are able to get into that space, and you're not really creating a sustainable market, small and medium-sized businesses that will be able to compete. And this is exactly why we're asking to have a regulation in Saudi Arabia that would open commercial industrial applications. In Saudi Arabia today, you're not really allowed to put PV on your roof. I tell everybody, just do it and try to have a revolution in that regard. Wheeling, I mean, we heard about wheeling, that ECRA has a regulation in wheeling, but it's not really demonstrated in any project yet in Saudi, and SEC might have objections to it. But to your point, to enable a proper target, to create a sustainable market that you have value chain and you have resource across the value chain, you have to open up the industry and the commercial industrial. You can't just keep it for gigawatt project tendered every year. I fully agree with that. It's an important point. I think it needs more work, and Dr. Shihri is here, and I think the government is aware of that. So.
I thought that was actually coming. I wanted to give Mariano a chance because he hasn't spoken very much to have his final since he started. I'll let him finish. If you have anything that you'd like to add before we close it off.
No, well, I think that the Kingdom has a very ambitious program. I think that it is important to understand what they want, what they are expecting with this, and what is going to be the financial approach, because that is going to drive which kind of investors and can maybe speed up the deploy of megawatts in the country. I would like to insist that if the motivation of the Kingdom is to create an industry, multi-gigawatt tenders awarded to one single contract is not going to spread the knowledge over the country and is going to put the things more challenging. Maybe you achieve the 9.5 gigawatt, but maybe you are missing a lot of things. Maybe you have the best tariff, but again, you are not creating an industry. And I think it is quite important because our opinion, solar is going to be the driven technology that is going to drive in most of the countries the production of electricity in the future. We are going to see it. Prices are going to continue coming down, and I think that the storage is going to be a big help for us.
Thank you. I think on that note, it's an excellent point to finish up on. Thank you very much to the panel. I think you've been excellent. And thank you to the audience. Thank you.